or something that intervenes in the process, the child will grow up actually internalizing the message, thinking that they are nothing, and they will act accordingly. So our speech that we use to critique or to correct others and indeed ourselves is super critical. And we have to make sure we're not compounding or making worse a situation instead of ameliorating it, which ultimately should be our intention.
A bunch of ideas were going through my head while you were describing that. One of the things that I found deeply soul troubling on my tours was the hunger that people had for words of encouragement. Mm-hmm. I was struck to my core by how many people were starving for words of encouragement. And I really mean that quite literally, words of encouragement. Words that would help them be courageous. And part of that was the message, I suppose, the message that each of them as individuals had something unique to offer, that if offered optimally or that everyone would benefit from, that we would all be lesser without that offering, and that was important and part of the purpose of moral striving, and that was true of everyone. And it's still, I don't know how much that affected me to see how desperate so many people were for words of that sort. And that's part of the alienation too, I think, that's rife in our culture, because we also have this guilt-induced proclivity to denigrate ourselves as human beings, a cancer on the planet, that everything we do is environmentally harmful, that all our activity is malevolent and ignorant. And I mean, we are limited and often corrupted beings, but, you know, we've only had ecological awareness as such, in some sense, for like 50 years. So, you know, how fast can we really learn this? And we are striving to live despite formidable obstacles, natural obstacles and social obstacles. And so it's reasonable to note now and then that we don't do so badly given the terrible constraints that we operate within. So that's, I guess, part of that appreciation for the commonality of suffering and vulnerability. And so, okay, so your level of analysis is the individual. So that's definitely different. That's definitely different. Now, in terms of rooting everything you do in love and compassion, let's go to that. What do you mean by that exactly? I mean, because that can easily be a cliche, right? I mean, sure. Instantly.
Yeah. So I'm pulling from two traditions, which I think you'll appreciate, two wisdom traditions. One being the Christian wisdom tradition, which is rooted in agape love. My understanding of agape love in the Christian tradition is a kind of love that enables us to become more human. So John Vervaeke, who I know is one of your colleagues, talks about agape love as the kind of love that a parent who has unconditional love directs toward a child, and who, in directing that love, actually enables a being to become more human. Because when you're born, you're sort of this blob, right? This helpless, defenseless blob. And then the love that a parent actually can direct to you, if it is the ideal agape love, actually enables you to become more human.
And that interestingly enough, that involves this criticism.
Right.
You know, because, well, for example, when my son is more disagreeable than my daughter, so he pushed boundaries quite hard, and he's quite disagreeable in that regard. And it was really interesting to watch him toy with a boundary. Like, he would just worry that boundary like mad. And now and then he'd go off to a daycare or something like that and interact with other kids, and he'd come home sort of possessed by the spirit of some misbehaving child he'd encountered that day, and he'd push us with that pattern of behavior. Yeah. And sometimes that would last for a while, and my wife and I would get together and say, look, this kid is going off the rails a little bit here. For a week, he doesn't get away with anything. Nothing. We just clamp down on him, and every time he deviates a tiny bit, because he was testing all the time. We're going to stop him. And every time we did that, his behavior improved, he got happier, and he liked us more. But what we weren't trying to punish him. What we were trying to do is to help him draw those fine distinctions between what constituted optimal behavior and suboptimal behavior. And that was really true in the domain of play and humor.
Yeah.
You know, because there's a real fine line between being playful and teasy and funny and annoying and aggressive and narcissistic. It's a really fine line. And so it's a lovely thing to be able, you need that critical eye to help guide a child for whom you want the best, to understand those fine distinctions. And that's part of separating the wheat from the chaff.
Yeah, I think I hadn't made that connection before, actually, but you're right. And I would say this is important because agape love is what Dr. King said was the ultimate ideal that the civil rights movement aspired towards and wanted to embody. This was a part of the reason why when people would go out and protest segregation in diners, say, before they would go out to protest, they would actually ask themselves, am I harboring a spirit of resentment? Am I harboring a spirit of rage or vengefulness? And if I am, then I'm not going to go out to protest today, because I'll just end up projecting that onto the person that I'm protesting. And they ultimately believe that even while I am fundamentally and vehemently disagreeing with this action that these people are engaging in, this racist action, this dehumanizing action, I want to make sure that how I comport myself does not dehumanize you in turn. And even more to the point, the way I comport myself is informed by the spirit of agape love, which means seeing you as made in the image of the divine, even as you are engaging in this problematic behavior, which is a very difficult thing to do and to practice it, like in live, when, you know, people are calling you racial slurs, or people are threatening you with lynchings, or people are actually in the process of lynching you. It is an incredibly difficult thing to practice and embody, but this attests to the strength of that movement. And I think there's so much more we can learn from that movement. And part of the theory of enchantment's goal is to sort of resurrect the spirit of that movement and bring it back into public discourse. And I think, because I think it has been lost to some extent.
Well, lost and just difficult in precisely the manner that you described, right? I mean, wouldn't it be lovely if we could comport ourselves in that manner? You know, that the goal of your interactions with someone is to do what you can in all humility to